Since the 1st of July, there have been more than 24 mass shootings in this country. That's 4 or more victims, and it's according to the Gun Violence Archive. In the days following each and every one of those, we hear calls from lawmakers, or to lawmakers, rather, from people out there saying, do something, anything about it. What Americans may not realize, however, is that lawmakers actually have done something about it. In fact, just over a year ago, President Biden signed into law the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It is, believe it or not, the first major piece of gun legislation in nearly 3 decades. What did it do? Well, the law enhanced background checks for gun buyers under 21. It closed the so-called boyfriend loophole to prevent domestic abusers from purchasing a firearm for 5 years at least. And it provided $15 billion in funding to address issues like school security and mental health. All of that the result of negotiations between 4 senators in particular. Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Republicans Thom Tillis of North Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas, and Independent Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Only on CBS Mornings, we sat down with 3 out of the 4 to talk about the effect of the law 1 year on. When President Joe Biden signed the bill into law, he said this will save lives.
God willing, it's going to save a lot of lives.
1 year on, is that true, Senator Murphy?
I think there's no doubt that this bill is saving lives. If you look at the first 5 months of 2023, gun violence rates are down in some of America's biggest cities. Criminologists think that part of what's happening is the beginning impacts of this law. And so I think just the data is beginning to tell us that this law is starting to have a real impact.
The law came together in the weeks after the shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, when an 18-year-old man killed 19 students and 2 teachers.
I heard Chris's speech on the floor after the Uvalde shooting, and it touched me.
I'm here on this floor to beg, to literally get down on my hands and knees and beg my colleagues. Find a path forward here.
And I saw my friend John Cornyn fly home to Texas to visit Uvalde. And it was those 2 instances that led me to say, that's it, we have to do something. And then, of course, I texted this guy, and this guy texted me, and then I texted John and said, that's it, let's do it.
It's amazing that you know, most Americans can't plan dinner over a text message chain, and you guys planned out major legislation. So well done on that.
That text thread by the end of that month was
It was long.
epic.
It was long.
Among the points they agreed to, a measure for enhanced background checks for those under 21, which, according to the Justice Department, has resulted so far in more than 200 denials. Those reportedly include an 18-year-old with a history of threatening behavior and a defendant facing charges for allegedly assaulting a police officer. But for Tillis, what's key is the denials are rare.
Since this bill was implemented, over 107,000 people under the age of 21 have applied to purchase a gun. 99.8% of them have been approved.
What is it that you're proudest of in this legislation?
I'm proud of the fact that we were able to pass the biggest investment in mental health in history. We all agreed that behavioral health had to be the foundation of everything we did.
We know that individuals who take up firearms and engage in mass violence, every single one of them is mentally challenged and disturbed, every single one of them. And we're preventing some of those acts of violence by getting folks that help.
Still, it took a lot of negotiating to get there, especially over state funding for so-called red flag laws, allowing courts to order the temporary removal of weapons from those who are a danger to themselves or others. Tillis pushed to guarantee gun owners the right to challenge those decisions.
States can apply for support to implement their red flag laws, but you've got to be in compliance with due process. Guess what? Most of the states, including red states, that have red flag laws can't qualify because they don't have the basic due process constraints that my friends here supported in the bill.
So this was probably one of the last things we ended up getting done.
It's a tricky business.
And those due process rights that now apply to every blue state, in addition to every red state, are in there because, you know, people like Tom were driving a hard bargain.
Even so, the North Carolina Republican Party last month voted to censure Tillis over his bipartisan efforts on gay rights and, yes, gun control.
There is a wing of your party in particular that doesn't want any restriction, no matter how carefully drawn. And in fact, I have to bring up that you were censured.
That was for a different matter.
Was it? It had nothing to do with guns?
Well, there were some people
Blatant
that
violation of the party platform.
Look,
was
at the
term.
end of the day, facts don't lie. Some of the people who opposed the bill said it was going to be that it was going to be impossible for someone under the age of 21 to get an approval.
Yeah.
107,600 have been approved.
But it all raises the question of what else, if anything, lawmakers may accomplish going forward. This law stops short of requiring background checks for all gun buyers, something 85% of Americans support. And President Biden's wish list, of course, includes an assault weapons ban.
I don't even think you guys can agree on the definition of assault weapon, let alone a ban.
Yeah, listen, what made this bill possible is that we knew what we couldn't agree on. And on that first day when we sat in...
Did you talk about the definition of assault weapon?
No,
we didn't, because we knew that wasn't going to be...
It would have been a really short meeting.
Also, look, we did this entire piece of legislation from first meeting to passing the Senate in 28 days.
Wow.
So we didn't spend time on that other stuff.
On the subject of time, the history of gun legislation in this country is such that tragedy drives the politics. In the 1930s, it was gangsters and street violence and machine guns. In the 1960s, it was public assassinations and riots and crime. And now we're dealing with mass shootings. Is the reality of the message just that the price of the Second Amendment is that there's always going to be gun violence in America?
Well, there's always going to be violence in America. And I, for one, think there's always going to be a Second Amendment protection in the Constitution for good reasons. What we need to do is start early, and that's what this bill did, to lessen the chances of the numbers of people who could be at risk and make a decision to harm themselves or somebody else, regardless of what they used to do it.
Even though that's not as far as I'd like to go, that's a really important step forward. That's saving lives as we speak. And the whole exercise, to me, was worthwhile because it's proving to the American people that democracy is not so broken that we can't find a way to come together, even on a topic that for 30 years has been a real political hotspot.
So part of what's so amazing about this legislation is it is the biggest and most sweeping gun legislation in 30 years, but I think most Americans have never heard of it at all. I remember we had Senator Bill Cassidy on, and he was referencing it constantly, and we work in the business of knowing what's going on in Washington, and even we were like, wait a minute, what was that now? And we had to write down a couple things.
Yes.
You know, it's under the radar. There are significant things, though, Gayle, and Nate, we were talking about this while the piece is airing. The fact that background checks for people under 21 have expanded and 200 denials so far, that's meaningful. I talked to some folks at Duke who study gun legislation and law, and they said that's significant.
That's meaningful change.
Yeah.
Meaningful change, but people still say it's still not enough. It's
Of course.
good to see that the bipartisan can work, because I know that it can, but when you look at the shootings that are still continuing, we're still sitting here tearing our hair out saying, what more can we do? But I'm glad that they're doing something.
They are doing something.
Something.
And
What were you
I
gonna
think
say, Nate?
it is saving lives.
No, I was just saying, to your point, Gail, more can be done.
Yeah.